Okay. Hello. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm your grandfather, Clifford Smith. I work as a licensed practical nurse at a nursing home. Father and grandfather to a great bunch of kids and grandkids who are spread out a little bit further than I would like sometimes. Now that you're all getting older, I don't see you as much as I'd like to.
Right. Okay. So before your current job, you were in the military. So what interested you in joining the military?
The nursing education that they provided. I worked for a state agency, and there was a small group. Everyone else there had a prior service military experience. They spoke well of it, especially about training, and so that led me to talk to a recruiter and to enlist in return for going to the Army's LPN school.
Okay. So more specifically, which branch were you in, and what was your specific role?
I was in the Army Reserves, and my specific role was the non-commissioned officer in charge of the intensive care unit of the 932 Forward Surgical Team. I did that for about 12 of my 22 years. The other times I worked on an intermediate care ward of a combat support hospital.
All right. So you talked about training. What was that like?
Training was physically demanding, but not so much that I couldn't do it, even though I was older when I enlisted. Because I worked for the Department of Corrections in their emergency response operations group, I'd already been exposed to military-style training. It wasn't unfamiliar. For some of the people around me, it was unfamiliar, and they had a harder time adjusting. The Army's training is kind of focused sometimes compared to the education that you get outside an armed military service.
So before you joined the Army, what were you doing for school or job?
I went to Purdue for a few semesters back in 1978, but didn't succeed. Wasn't prepared. I didn't have good study skills. I worked in fast food restaurants, and then for about 7 years before enlisting, I worked for the Department of Corrections as an officer, correctional sergeant, and a risk manager, trying to keep agencies and facilities from getting into trouble with the state fire marshal or the Board of Health.
And how old were you whenever you joined the Army?
I was 34 and turned 35 shortly after I joined the Army, which is as old as you were allowed to be and still enlist in those days.
And how long did you serve?
22 years.
2 years. Okay. Were you ever deployed, and if so, where was it?
Yes, the 932 Forward Surgical Team deployed twice to Iraq. The Army's nursing school is about a year long, which is consistent with civilian type school. Ivy Tech, as an example, takes about a year after prerequisites are in. So I started out on active duty for a year and a half. That's kind of like a deployment in terms of other schools. And then to Iraq for several months in 2003, and then again for a year beginning in August of 2009.
Do you have any stories or anything interesting that was different from Iraq to America, or what the people were like there?
The differences were surprising to me because I was not traveled at that time. I had never been to Mexico or third world countries, and so the depth to which their lives are different than ours surprised me at every turn and made me appreciate what we have. And there were some great commonalities: happiness, gratitude, generosity. Those transcend the cultural differences that I noticed.
If you were your younger self again, would you do it again? Would you join the Army again if you got the chance?
Yes.
Tell me why.
Yeah. Why do you think so? Any specific reason?
Yeah, I think that if I had continued without the military experience, especially the school to be an LPN, that I'd not have found a direction that let me pay the bills, have a happy, more fulfilling life.
Do you think that a lot of the reason was money, or were you really passionate about the things that you did?
It was money almost completely that made me make those decisions. Having done that, the reasons that it was worth staying for 22 years were a developed passion, sometimes developed strong feelings about who I was with and what we were doing.
How did your military experience help in your following career, your current career?
It defined it almost completely. I've worked almost exclusively as a nurse since then, and I don't. The military focuses its LPN school on trauma a lot more than other schools do. So I haven't really worked in trauma. You have to have a significant education in the United States to have a good role in an emergency room or in an intensive care unit.
How did it affect you, positive or negative? How did it change you as a person?
Positive. I was able to see some goals more clearly and reach them. Like I said earlier, a happier and more fulfilling life, and no small part of that is the ability to have a financially stable life where I can pay for some of the things that my family and I benefit from.
So, as seeing that you liked it, would you recommend it to the people around you to join the military?
I would. I do. When I see someone at work who is at a point in their life, they want to go to school, but they can't figure out how to do it, how to afford it. Student loans, grants, their own money just aren't coming together, and they seem like they're perfectly bright, capable of succeeding at a school. I mention it. Sometimes if I see them as a really great candidate, I mention it and I offer them details. I encourage acquaintances, coworkers, and family members. I've spoken with you about the military. I've tried to help my daughter understand all of her options after she graduated. The things that just a side career with the military, like in the Air Force Reserves, for example, would offer her. So, yeah.
Do you have any specific favorite memories or stories you can share?
Yeah, there are a million stories that are suitable for all audiences. The one that I mentioned to someone just yesterday was, and this is an older person, one of my patients in a nursing home. We were talking about the military and this person's return from Vietnam and how they were received versus how we were received. We know that a lot of Vietnam veterans were treated badly at airports by the people there. When we sat down in Atlanta and stepped off the plane carrying 2 big, heavy duffel bags, there were people there with their kids to come out and carry those bags for us and show us where the USO was. We could set things down and sit down and wait for our next flight. I almost cried.
All right, and always with the good experiences, there's usually bad. Do you have any scary moments or scary things that happened, or was the whole thing positive?
there were scary moments, but I think there may be something wrong with me because I was ready for that. Little dump of adrenaline. We got attached to a special forces group, and so at 43 years of age, I found myself stepping off the back of a blacked out C-130 wearing night vision goggles in the company of half of our forward surgical team and half of an operational detachment A team in the dark of 2 a.m. in northern Iraq. And I thought, this is someplace that I never thought I would be even a year ago. So adrenaline was really high. So I felt like I was possibly out of my depth, but I was very focused so as to do the right thing, not screw up.
Okay. Okay, so how did being in the Army impact family, and how did you stay in touch with your family?
Boy, different things at different times. A year and a half in nursing school, paper letters to and from, and occasional phone calls. The deployment in 2003 was on short notice, and there was no contact for weeks. A British journalist named Stuart Hughes was injured by a landmine and ended up in our surgical resource. He had a satellite phone that we didn't have, so when he was alert and oriented, we were able to make a short phone call back by satellite phone. And I was lucky enough to catch my wife at work. I knew the phone number for that unit at the hospital and called, and we were able to speak. And then after that, in 2003, for the last couple of months, it was possible to make sporadic phone calls. 2009, it was a much more mature infrastructure for communications, and so there were letters going in both directions. I got a lot of packages in the mail with support. I got packages in 2003. They all came, almost all of them came on one day. They had been held in a backlog for us while we were in the mountains and not available to receive mail or packages. So they were stacked up head high on my bunk when I got back from a detail I was on. In 2009, I got support from family, from my wife and my mom and kids and others. Got packages in the mail with Slim Jims and personal hygiene, toiletries, some toothbrushes, just food, everything that I might have wanted, and that was great.
Do you have any other specific stories or funny stories that things you experienced while in Iraq, or with your friends, or just in the Army in general?
Yeah, so many. Hard to pick. I said that coming back from overseas to the Atlanta airport was the first place that we put down in returning in 2010, and our transportation from there to Indiana was kind of fragmented. They weren't ready for us, so I came by myself into the Indianapolis International Airport, and I was met by my wife and you and your brother wearing little military uniforms, and that was a lot better reception than I think some of my peers got when they were moving en masse to some other airport that wasn't close enough for their families to get to.
Did you make any friendships in the military, and if so, do you still have contact with them or still see them?
Yeah, they're almost exclusively the friendships that I have now. A very good friend, it's a common phrase in the military, battle buddy. Somebody who looks out for your interests and theirs, and you do the same for them. He lives just several miles from here, and we work on and ride motorcycles together, and sometimes work on his house, or he advises me on work on this house. So he is the closest geographically and my best friend, and that's from the military.
Do you have any funny stories with him, or stories that you remember specifically that were with him that make it memorable? C-130 going into Iraq in 2003,
we were supposed to have about the pre-flight brief said we'd have about an hour of straight and level flight before we got near Iraq's air defense, and then we would want to be tied down to something in the back of the aircraft because they were going to go fly low, close to the ground to avoid being shot at as much. But somebody didn't tell the Turkish air defense artillery that we were allowed to pass, so that we started getting shot at much sooner than we were told, and people in the back of the aircraft weren't tied down when the pilots started having to make evasive flight maneuvers. And Whipke and I both got thrown around in the back of the aircraft pretty well, but both thought of it more as a bad roller coaster ride, because if there's nothing you can do about it, no sense in stressing over it.
Right. So, being away for so long, was there any entertainment? And if so, what did you do to pass the time?
In 2003, we read a lot, and we realized early on the appetite that we had for books and the number of books that were around. So people were reading genres that they wouldn't normally read. And if you were next up to receive someone's paperback book, but they weren't done with it yet, we tore paperback books in half so that someone could start on the first half of the book while you finished reading the second half of the book. That was our main entertainment in 2003. In 2009, there were, in the larger posts, there were big screen televisions that were run as a cinema. There was a gym. The USO operated a little program where they would record you reading a children's book to your family at home, and then send that book and the recording to the family at home. And you know that I did that and sent you guys the recording and the book. That was most of the entertainment. Yeah.
Speaking of books and movies, was there any other specific artifacts or items that you remember bringing home from Iraq, or just memorable items in general?
In the Army's meals ready to eat, they have a tiny little glass bottle of Tabasco sauce, and they used to be in each and every one, so it was common to have those tiny little bottles. So I cleaned them out, and a dozen or so, and dried them out and put some sand from Iraq into them and brought those back as trinkets and souvenirs for others. Going through customs, it was determined that we weren't allowed to bring back sand, but mine wasn't discovered, and I hope I haven't ruined the ecology of the United States by bringing back sand from Iraq contrary to customs rules and regulations.
Speaking of the MREs, I know a lot of people think that the food seems bad. What was the food like?
In 2003, we were attached to the Special Forces group and living in the mountains and eating such a wide variety of whatever we could. Most of it was chickens and goats and vegetables that were purchased locally. And not everybody tolerated that well, so there were some people with dysentery. On the way out, we came to a base, and they had American military cooks, and they were serving, so we had our first great hot American kind of meal. But we found out by asking, what time is breakfast? Oh, we're leaving tonight. Tomorrow you get a contractor who's going to bring in some chickens and goats. So that was pretty bad. In 2009, Big Army was there, and we were not up in the mountains. So food was MREs or well prepared by contractors with resources.
So along with that, a lot of people think that the Army seems scary. Did you ever feel pressured or stressed during your time in the Army?
Yeah, definitely. They start out with pressure and stress. You probably have to feel that you can accommodate some pressure and stress before you raise your hand and say, I do solemnly swear, and go off to basic training. And there the stress exists. But if it turns out that you were wrong and that you're not prepared to accept that kind of stress, to do some emergency medical procedure on someone while chaotic, loud things are happening around you, then that's time to separate from military training and not go any further. So there was stress in training, there was stress in application of the skills to real life.
What was your least favorite part about being in the Army?
You know, the first thing that comes to mind is leaving. I was 34 when I enlisted, and so 22 years was about as long as I could have served, unless I'd been in a lot better physical shape. But my years were numbered then, so I miss not being in the military.
Do you recall the day that your service ended? What was it like, and where were you?
My service ended while I was in the reserves, and I got orders saying you are ordered to the retired reserve. Yeah, my last day in uniform was at Camp Atterbury. We took our soldiers down there to qualify with firearms.
Okay. Describe your time in the Army with either one film or one song.
Not prepared for that. You know, all the common Creedence Clearwater Revival songs that are associated with Vietnam. We play those because we like to associate our experience with those of the people who came before us. But yeah, I don't know. I can't answer. Don't have a good answer for that one.
Okay, and did your time in the Army spark any interest in anything like weaponry, vehicles, anything like that?
I was interested in firearms and scuba diving and rappelling before I joined the military. So those interests were amplified and rewarded. But I don't think I came up with anything in the military that I pursue as a hobby or an interest because I ran into it in the military.
So now, what are your current passions, hobbies, anything you do for fun after you got out of the Army?
I tinker with and ride a motorcycle.
Now, going back, where were you born?
Here in central Indiana, in Newcastle, which is just about 45 minutes east of Indianapolis.
Okay, so your family life, did you have anybody previously that was in the military before you?
Yeah. My grandfather served in World War I. My dad served in the Air Force with the Strategic Air Command during the Cold War. His older brother served in World War II. My brother served in the Army before I did with the 82nd Airborne.
Do you think that without any of them you would have been in the Army still, or do you think that played a big role in your joining?
Played a significant enough role. Talking to my brother about his experiences, seeing him in uniform and the benefit that it had for him. Seeing, you know, in the Strategic Air Command, they don't encourage you to take a lot of pictures of nuclear-armed B-52s. So my dad didn't have a lot of pictures from his experience, but the few that he did seemed like he was doing something important and benefiting personally from it, and his sense of his self-image, if nothing else.
So the role of the military will always be pretty important. So what does it look like to join the military? What's the process like?
Get a degree. If you have something in the military specific in particular that you'd like to do, get a degree that matters to the branch of service that you would like to join. Get a degree so that you can be a commissioned officer. The experience is very different from being enlisted, and it's more rewarding. So, I mean, financially in at least. Also, the responsibilities for leaders are more significant. So if you're ready to engage in some responsibilities, if you don't have a college degree and you're not going to get one before you join the military, then enlisting and making use of the educational benefits that the military offers is a good idea. A lot of people go to join the military and then use their college fund money to get their degree.
Do you have any other advice or warnings for anybody that would like to join the military?
Know what you want from your military experience. If it's a sense that you've served, choose the path where you want to look back on your life later and see that you've served, the things that you want to do in order to be of service. If you want specific educational rewards, just look and read and take your time. And if you enlist, treat any recruiter that you talk to like a bad used car salesman, because there are some good ones out there, but there are more who just have a quota to meet, and you don't want to be part of their statistics. You want to get something useful in return for your service.
If you think that you never would have joined the Army, what do you think you'd be doing? Anything else in particular?
I might still be working for the Indiana Department of Corrections. My brother retired from the DOC just this year, so that might have been it.
Do you think there's any other branches that you'd be interested in? Even currently, I know with the space stuff, do you think any of these branches were more interesting to you, or would you still stick with the branch that you're in with the Army and medical stuff?
My experience with the Army and medical was a good one, and something that I could do. Space Force, they have some specific wants and needs. Rocket science is actually hard. The Air Force, the amenities are nicer in the Air Force. You get to stay in a hotel instead of sleeping in a tent in the mud. So maybe I'd have considered the Air Force.
Do you have any other funny stories you'd like to share, or any specific times of something memorable, funny happened?
Again, there are a lot, but I would have to sort through them to find one that I would be willing to record and compromise any of my peers' dignity.
Is there any specific, I know we were talking about a song, is there any specific songs or that whole special, what song were you guys? Mockingbird. Is that, what's the story behind that?
Bird scene. How about that Horses song? You guys were on the way back from Chicago. You were singing about Toby Keith song and Willie Nelson song.
The Taliban song.
Oh, the Taliban song, yeah.
Yeah, the soldiers who served in Afghanistan probably get a smile when they listen to that. Toby Keith was a friend of the military, I think.
And finally, do you have any photographs of your time in the military or pictures that you brought back?
A lot. In 2009, about halfway through or 3/4 of the way through that deployment, I put together enough pictures to fill a CD, and then because we're allowed to send mail for free from a forward area like that, I made copies and mailed them to everyone who I thought might have been interested in them. Upon reflection, some of those pictures are from the operating room, and I was releasing them to places that I had no control over where they would go eventually. So I probably should have edited them a little more strictly for being family-oriented pictures.
All right, well, that's everything I have. So thank you for your time, and thank you for your service.
Thank you for your support.